Hello and welcome. This is a podcast where I talk about whatever I want. I'm Johnnie and I'm a librarian. Let's talk about censorship and banning material in libraries. Yesterday I was part of a coffee chat online with a group that I write articles for online, and we were talking about LGBTQ plus media and accessibility and how important it is for people to be represented in it could be movies or film, TV shows, and how the LGBTQ landscape has changed. You had some stuff in the late 70s, and you had some stuff in the 80s, and then you had a little bit in the 90s. We had Ellen and Will and Grace, and I just, that was like all people can think about. And then in the 2000s, things loosened up quite a bit. Queer as Folk was huge, the L word, and there was a lot of, thinking about like LGBTQ characters. It reminded me that early in cinema and even, the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, the main bad guy was typically a flamboyant, coded homosexual character. And you're thinking there's movies like Casablanca, or even the homosexual figure is confused and, really screwed up in the head, like Norman Bates in Psycho, fixation with his mother, a voyeur. He could be seen as homosexual. I mean, he dressed as his mother. It could be just cross-dressing as an escape. So these things kept coming up, and we had some questions from the people that had attended the webinar, like, what thoughts on banning books in libraries or banning material, whether it's grade school or higher education. Higher education usually has a little bit more freedom. Grade school, not so much. And the reason is because the dependency on state funds. So whoever's in power in the state legislation, the governor, what they say goes. So if they say we're going to withhold funding because you've purchased these books or you're teaching this material, they can do that. And guess what? You're bent over. You can't get out of that even though you don't agree with it. So that's a problem. Higher education, sometimes we have endowments, we have extra money. Of course, the goal of any higher education, public institution, is to get away from government funds and be completely funded by endowments. Certain larger, well-known places of higher education are like that. And that's really gives them a lot of autonomy to purchase whatever they want, autonomy to teach what they want, autonomy to do whatever they want as an independent institution. But those that are kind of dependent on state funds, and my institution is very much dependent on it, whatever the government says, the state government usually goes. But usually they don't attack higher education. But we see this in Florida now with Meatball Ron, who I don't think anyone's a fan of. He has absolutely no personality. He is, who goes against Disney? It's just, he's confused. His messages are mixed. He has his own ideology. He needs to go, and he needs to leave politics. He does not belong in politics. He's pushing his own agenda, and this trend towards Christian nationalism is absolutely scary and disgusting. Sorry to get political, but I'm sorry, as a librarian, and I see books being banned or teachers being fired because they showed a Disney movie in a class, that's upsetting. That's a problem. One of the things you see is when books are banned in in grade school, their sales usually go through the roof because people are curious. Why is this being banned? What is this content? What is so interesting or scary about this content? I've read some crazy, crazy books, and some of them absolutely disgust me. But, will I read it again? No, I usually want to finish the book. One of my favorite, I mentioned this yesterday when I was talking, one of my favorite things is when Truman Capote's Other Voices, Other Rooms came out. Librarians would hide it behind the desk, and you had to go to the desk and ask for it. So librarians were essentially censoring material for their patrons, which that is not the case anymore. But the reason why was Other Voices, Other Rooms had a sort of coded gay character, kind of flamboyant, and that was considered, when did that come out, in the late 40s maybe? I forget. I've read the book. It's a good book. I like Truman Capote. His writing is very nice. And that book was considered quite controversial. And then he went to write on In Cold Blood, which is the most famous work, Breakfast at Tiffany's. Really, really good writer. And so librarians, the American Library Association, it dictates we do not censor anything. We do not hold information back from our patrons. So even though my ideology doesn't agree with someone else's ideology, here's a real-life example. A patron came to the reference desk and asked me, he wanted to know where Ann Coulter was speaking and if she would be anywhere in Virginia within the next 6 months. And I really don't care for Ann Coulter and her rhetoric. And I said, well, let me look. So I looked up her tour schedule. She was not coming anywhere near. I think the closest was D.C., but but I gave him the information. I said, is there anything else you need? More like a public library question, not so much an academic question. He was a public patron. We don't have a lot of those, but we do, and they usually ask really random, odd questions. And that's kind of showing my library snobbery. There's a big difference between a public librarian and an academic librarian. Public librarians do a lot of general stuff. Academic librarians mainly focus on research and teaching and running their departments, which can be very different from public librarians and who they service. But that's an aside. But the whole idea of censorship to me is distasteful. I want to experience and make judgment on my own. I don't want anybody to filter anything for me. Let me access whatever it is. Let me find out what I like, what I don't like. And this goes into the whole, the Little Mermaid, the live-action Little Mermaid. It's played by a black character now, black actress. I think that's amazing. Who said a mermaid has to be white? And opening things up to other people, that's the same thing as creating content, creating a web series, creating a TV show, creating anything, and then having that reflect current situation in society. Gay people, black people, transgender people. That's important because representation is everything. I remember growing up in little small town Smithfield, Virginia, and I watched this is crazy, but I would watch the Cosbys, and I thought, this is a fairy tale. A lot of my black friends did not have money. My family didn't have much of anything, but seeing the Cosbys, a doctor and a lawyer, and then they're black, that was like, what is this? This is not realistic. I had no idea. This is me being 10 years old watching the Cosbys, and I'm like, why are they acting white? I just didn't understand. Of course, sort of sheltered childhood there. But think of gay characters. The first gay character I ever saw, actually, I did not like him. It was Norman from the first season of The Real World on MTV. And I would take sneak peeks of this show and look at him like, ugh, ooh, he's so queer. I don't like him. I don't like this character. But now when I look back, I'm like, wow, he was a really attractive guy. And I see nothing wrong with him. But back then, when I was like a mid-teen, I was like, oh my God, he's just giving all gays a bad name. He's too flamboyant, and what did I know? The same thing, I remember being in 9th grade English, and I snatched a copy of, I believe it was Time magazine, and it had Liberace on it, and the article in it was about him having HIV/AIDS, and for some reason that just fascinated me, and I stole it from the classroom. I mean, it was just a pile of them, and I think they were going to be thrown away, but I took it without telling anybody to read it because I wanted to know more about his lifestyle. And this is me still questioning, figuring out my identity. But I had no exposure, no representation to look up to. And when I worked in social services, we also talked about representation and how you go into a poor African-American community and you ask the kids what do they want to do when they grow up. And they say, I want to be a famous football player. I want to play for the NFL. I want to play I want to play basketball. I want to be famous. I want to make millions of dollars. You don't hear them saying, oh, I want to be a chemist, or I want to work in aviation, or I want to be an architect. You don't hear that. Where's the representation there? They don't see that. They see these unrealistic expectations. What happens when your expectations are unrealistic? You usually don't live up to them. And what happens? You become disappointed, distraught. So when you don't see those things that you can see yourself in, it really does harm you growing up. It really delays you becoming, the whole person you could be. So you're delayed in that respect. Even when I was 18, 19, 20, my peers went into college. There were gay men that I saw, and they were all over the place. Some were really annoying, some were very much closeted, but I figured them out. And then they eventually came out. When I was in high school, we had like one gay guy. I did not talk to him. But people would talk behind his back, but he really didn't. He fit in. He was kind of accepted because he was kind of macho and just kind of whatever. And he did. I mean, I can't believe that he wasn't ridiculed or picked on as much as he was. But again, getting back to representation, it's so important for kids, just developmentally, and even in life, like when we're a professional, we want to emulate people. Like if I'm a librarian, what are some librarians in the past that are famous that I find fascinating? There aren't too many, but Barbara Giddings is one of my heroes. She was a librarian who invented the kissing booth, the Kiss a Queer booth, and she was a big advocate for LGBT rights. And she was an amazing person, extremely caring, and she was very much an activist, a librarian activist. And I find her story extremely fascinating. There's not too much out there. There is a monograph on her. I think it's self-published. She's been in a few documentaries. She was a part of a few organizations, and she really did a lot of groundwork. A lovely lady, and she died not too long ago. But she's a fascinating character. Barbara is. I just think, she is, if you're a gay librarian, you do know of her. And the Kiss a Queer booth, it seems like, it's basically saying, hey, it seems like it's distasteful, but it's like, hey, we're like everybody else. We're not diseased. We're affectionate. And dare yourself to, open yourself up to an innocent kiss or even a hug. And it takes away the stigma. Yesterday we talked about tropes in gay movies and films, and how the AIDS trope has been kicked to death, how the coming out trope has been kicked to death. The stories are still there. The stories will still be told, but there are other stories that need to be told, like more about trans identity. The film industry seems to be very much shy about tackling trans rights and trans coming to terms with your body stories. There really are not a lot out there, and that is talking to a professional distributor in the film industry. He was saying this. He's like, they just don't. It's not a thing. They don't really go after it. You've had some really soft, kind of movies like Transamerica was the first one that I'd watched, and that has Felicity Huffman as a trans M to F, and that's a really good movie. But it's a woman playing, this character, and she's playing a character of a woman, but used to be a man, and it's not terribly believable at all. But these stories, like the DVDs, the Blu-rays that we have here in the library, I'd say 3/4 are coming out stories or young love stories where budding sexuality is one of those things. There's two controversial movies. One's highly controversial, and one is not so much controversial, but it did cause some controversy. The first one is For a Lost Soldier, and I've talked about this on my YouTube channel. I absolutely love the movie. It could be distasteful for some people. It does involve some abuse, but the feelings of being a really young kid and an older guy kind of, discovering you and making you feel like you're all that, it's depicted in that. And that's a little controversial, but that's talking about sexuality as well. And if you watch the movie or you have access to the book's out of print, but I have read the book. You can get it through interlibrary loan usually. It's a controversial theme. The other one is, of course, Call Me By Your Name, which I absolutely love. The director is amazing. I think the movie was shot so well, and the appearance of flies more and more as the fruit decays, as the love decays, is just amazing. And the speech that Elio's father gives to him just brings you to tears. He's like, by the time you're my age, nobody wants you, and your heart's worn out. And it's just really, really a touching film. But again, Elio is 17. The book is amazing, by the way. The movie is a Disney version of the book. The book is so much better. And Oliver is, was he 23 or something? Not much in age difference, but it was controversial in that he was under 18 and, couldn't properly consent, even though they're in Italy, and they had this, relationship, this, love affair that burnt hot and then went out and kind of smoldered. And you get the feel, Armie Hammer is such problematic in that film. He's very emotionless, and even when he tries to convey emotion, it's very, very removed, where Timothée Chalamet is amazing. He's such a good actor. You actually feel for him. You feel his pain as he cries, as his heart aches, but you feel nothing for the character Oliver. You just don't. He's just, and the actor who is now, of course, blacklisted in Hollywood. I think a lot of people, when it came out, they really were hoping for a sequel, and then the second book came out called Find Me, and I read about half of that and put it down. It was not anything. I did not enjoy it. But anyway, that was some thoughts on censorship and representation based on my little coffee chat yesterday I had that people attended. Since these ideas were kind of fresh in my head, I thought I would just share them on my channel. But anyway, thank you so much for listening, and I really appreciate it, and I appreciate any comments you have. So anyway, everyone, please take care.